The Ukraine is a very serious, very tough situation. And this is Biden's war. This is not my war, but I want to see if I can solve it because probably close to 5,000 young soldiers a week are being killed, Russian and Ukrainian.
Do you think Vladimir Putin wants peace?
I think he does, yes. I think
Still?
he does. I think
Even with the
of
raining missiles
I
on?
think he really, his dream was to take over the whole country. I think because of me, he's not going to do that.
Yikes. Listen, that's President Trump earlier this week on ABC News trying to, again, take down this path to say this was Biden's war. Now, listen, I've been saying from the beginning, it was Biden's war. And the fact that we're in this ugly situation where there's not a good outcome is because of the leadership provided by the Biden administration. There's no question about that. It's graphic, and there's thousands of pieces of evidence that we could provide. Biden, of course, gave leadership to the entire rest of the Western world and Europe, who gleefully followed in that path, and they don't want to change paths. So they don't want to follow Trump down a different path, and have been doing everything they can to cajole, to encourage, to try and manipulate whatever Trump to come over to their side, as opposed to getting him to draw over to their side. Now, if there was some validity to say that this situation that exists right now is the responsibility of the previous administration, the longer this goes, before Trump actually takes any decisive different action, then he's going to be able to, or he's not going to be able to say this is Biden's fault anymore. He's going to own it. And I think, in my view, I think he is literally days away from losing the last sliver of a chance that he may have. He's not done himself any favors either. Because, listen, he campaigned that he could have this thing solved in a day. All the time he kept running saying, yes, this is what I can do. I know how to end this. Biden, Sleepy Joe, when he was the candidate for a long time, he's just going to keep going down a bad path. Obviously, I agreed with that. Obviously, it turned out that way. That's exactly what Biden was doing. He didn't have a strategy. He didn't have an end state in mind. He didn't even have a vision for how the things that we were doing, the money we were spending, the ammunition we were providing, all this stuff, there was no vision for how it could bring the war to an end. It only funded and facilitated the perpetuation and the ability of the Ukraine to fight on a daily basis, but nothing to actually take it to a victory or any kind of positive success. Every diplomatic opportunity was eschewed and ignored, and in fact, outright hostile, pushed against. They didn't want this war to end. At least they didn't want to accede to the reality. They just had this fantasy that it was going to go to victory. We know that. Okay, now Trump ran on. He's going to be different. He's not going to follow that path, and he could have it over in a day. And in fact, after he won the election, he said, I'll have this over even before I take office. It was always unclear what he actually meant by that, even with hyperbole. I don't know how you have the thing over before you take office, but all right, that's what he said. Well, then it's like, all right, well, no, I'll have this over in 24 hours. I know I can bring this guy together, Putin. I can bring this guy together, Zelensky, and I'll get them both. I work good with them. I know I know how to do this. I know what it's going to take. Okay, 24 hours came and went. Now, obviously, I don't think any rational person ever actually thought one day he was going to have this done, but I gave him the correct benefit of the doubt and said, okay, well, he probably means on day one, he's going to pick this issue up and he's going to start like putting it on the front burner and then start proactive, active means and measures to bring the war to an end. And instead, it was just almost nothing at all. And again, we thought, all right, there's things going on behind the scenes. There's certainly actions going on. And it turns out that there were some things going on behind the scenes, but nothing decisive. And then the day started turning into weeks. And he's talking to people. He's having meetings. Zelensky is not moving an inch. He continues to go down the path that we want to fight. We want more stuff. We want more ammunition. We want more support. That's all he kept saying. He didn't change. Actually, that's what he had been saying before Trump was inaugurated and continued to say afterwards. Meanwhile, Trump is talking in these different directions. But then we bring in Keith Kellogg. Keith Kellogg then says, yes, I consider this a really high value thing to do and something I put a lot of pressure on. We're going to try to get it wrapped up quickly. And then a week or two after he started getting involved, now he said, all right, no, 100 days. I think 100 days is where we're going to have this. That's my objective. You hold me to this. So we are. I think that we can get this done in 100 days, have it over. And again, if he was going down a path that says, all right, behind the scenes, Europe, Ukraine, fellas, there's a new sheriff in town, as they themselves used that phrase many times. And because of that, this is what we're willing to do, and we ain't going no further. This is it. This is as far as we're going. You guys either get on board, or he should have done by this date. We're going to say we're going to walk. I mean, he should have been very honest and upfront and open and firm on this with the senior leaders behind the scenes. This is all we're going to do. We're not going down this path. There is no success. There is no possibility that this is ever going to end anywhere good. And I'm not going to continue to throw good money after bad. And if he's genuinely motivated by the people that are dying, as he says he is, then the most moral, ethical thing to do would be to end the U.S. support. McGregor said it on our channel many times. Trump should have just said, all right, that's it. On this day, whatever it was he could have picked, we're ending all support. Financial, military, ammunition, intelligence, training, anything. All of our folks, we're going to remove. Everything's coming out. That's what he could have done. That's if he had just told them that behind the scenes and said, here's a date, you could have given a private ultimatum. This is the situation, and we're not going. You guys understand. You need to consciously understand that if you don't follow my lead here, and we can put a good face on it, this is where I'm going, and I will not back down from this. And then if they didn't do it, then he comes out and makes the public statement and says, all right, this is it. This is as far as we're going. That would have done it. You could have even picked 100 days. You could have done it like at maybe the 30-day mark. So you still had 60 days to let them figure this out. But then 100 days came and went. Nothing happened. Now, on I think it was the 18th of April, it looked to me like that the White House had finally come to that conclusion, belatedly, but it looked like they had. Rubio went out and very firmly said, we are days away, from ending this war. If we don't feel like the two sides are coming together where they're going to make any kind of positive movements towards peace, then we're going to walk. We're just going to say this is not something not solvable. Nothing happened that week. Then a little over a week ago, 8 or 9 days ago, Rubio again came out and said, that's it. We have days left. And I think nothing's going to happen if we don't. Then 2 days ago, you had Tammy Bruce, the spokesperson for the Secretary of State. She says, we're no longer acting as mediators. That's it. We're not going to do it. We're not going to be flying to some country at the drop of a hat, as she put it. That's what it is. But then nothing happened after that either. So, and I think even within the last 48 hours, I believe it was, you had the vice president go out and say, well, this war's not going to end anytime soon. We're still trying to negotiate it, like softening the position, leaving everybody to say, what is the position? Where are we going? What is the plan? Because if you said almost now 3 weeks ago was the first time that Rubio said it, we're nearing the end. And then another week or 10 days later, you reiterated it. We're days away. And then your spokeswoman says, we're now no longer being the mediator, but somehow we're still involved, which was unclear. And oddly enough, nobody in that press conference pressed her on that to find out what that meant. No one even asked. She certainly didn't volunteer the information. But now here we are on Saturday. There's still no evidence that we've made any kind of a decision. And listen, we're coming up on some big dates like the May 9th situation inside of Russia, where they're going to have this big celebration for the Victory Day, the 80th anniversary of World War II victory over the Nazi regime. And they're just picking up the pace all along the front line. I've shown you in the last couple of days, in 2 days this past week, they conquered 29 square kilometers on one day, 20 square kilometers the day before yesterday. I haven't seen the numbers this morning. Not sure how far that's going, but they continue to put pressure all along the front, from the Sumy area in the north all the way around to Zaporizhia, down in the south, and everywhere in between, the Kupiansk area up in the Luhansk area. Again, all these places, the military pressure continues on. Russia continues to build up its forces, etc. So where are we in this? See, Trump also, in that clip I played there from ABC News earlier this week, is putting himself in a bad situation even more so, because he's there on record and saying, yeah, Putin wanted to take the whole thing of Ukraine, but because of me, he won't do it. Well, if you agree to the June 14 lines, they probably won't do it. They'll probably agree to that. And of course, the June 14 lines isn't just the map lines, it's also the demilitarization and the denazification. And if Trump is unable to get Europe and Ukraine to agree to that, then it's likely that Russia will continue to go on. They will continue to drive. We've had Colonel Jacques Beau, we've had the German person, Patrick Bob, who's coming on, the journalist. He thinks that they're going to go to the river. Everybody we've had on thinks that they're going to go to the river. Certainly John Mearsheimer says that's at probably the minimum, which is nearly all of Ukraine. And who's to say how much further they might go if they still don't get a capitulation from whoever the government is at that point, if that continues on that long. And that'll all be, people will say, wait a minute, you said you would have this over. You see, he's setting himself up for a big problem here because it makes it look like that Trump either doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't have a plan, or worse, perhaps, he can't compel Ukraine and Europe to follow his lead on there, because I assure you, they aren't following anything so far. As a matter of fact, here, I believe this was just yesterday, Volodymyr Zelensky is looking anywhere but for peace.
Росія продовжує відмовлятись від повного, тривалого припинення вогню. Вже всі партнери втомились від цих російських маніпуляцій. Ми захищаємо наші позиції, ми будемо діяти відповідно, як на фронті, так і в наших діях на російській території. Війна має відчуватись там, звідки вона і прийшла.
So he's not looking for peace, folks. He is definitely looking elsewhere. He's just saying, I'm going to keep fighting. We're going to keep taking it into Russia. Even though they got kicked out of Kursk, they got kicked out of the Belgorod area. They're still trying to move some things around the edges there. There's no military value in doing that. It's just increasing the loss. Everywhere you look, they continue to do it. But then there's this strange thing. So one would expect that if Zelensky is not talking about coming anywhere in Trump's direction, they got this minerals deal signed, but that's almost completely separate from an end of war negotiations. It's not even related, frankly. And if he keeps talking over and over like that, then you have to say, well, then Trump's message ain't getting through. And then Trump did something really strange earlier this week. Instead of curtailing support, he increased it. And it was a small one, but there was a $50 million military package that was added this week that hadn't been added before. And you have to wonder, what is this all about? You added a $50 million package for defense articles, as that headline puts there. And the question is going to be, what message are you sending? Even though that's a small dollar figure, you've given something to Ukraine that they need to continue to fight. That's not moving in the direction of ending the war. Now, whether this is going to come more later, it's unclear, because $50 million in terms of a war is nothing. $61 billion last year from the Biden administration also didn't even affect the tactical outcome. So $50 million is literally like throwing like a couple of dimes maybe at the problem. That's about all that you're going to get done there. That's not going to do anything. But the question is, where are we going here? Where is Trump's leadership that he can't get Zelensky to do anything that he seems to want? I want to remind you here, by the way, folks, to be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that before. That is so much more important than you may think, and helps get this message out there. And believe me, this message needs to resonate far and wide, because people need to understand that we're moving in a direction and may already have crossed the Rubicon to where it is going to be Trump's war. And if he is not capable of getting even Zelensky or Europe, who's on our side, to change or modify anything that they're doing, then that does not bode well for where this is going to go. Because if Russia doesn't get that deal that they're asking for, folks, the war will continue on. There is nothing, even if Trump turned that into 50 billion instead of 50 million, it's not going to change the outcome. Ukraine doesn't have the manpower. We actually had Glenn Ignazio on yesterday, who's spent a lot of time in Ukraine, is very pro on the Ukraine, cares for the Ukraine people, of course, and that's understandable anytime you've been on the ground. But even he had to admit that it won't make any difference anymore. This is somebody who's definitely for the Ukraine side. And even he had to admit, we don't have the manpower on the Ukraine side. So it doesn't matter about the money like it didn't last year. And yet we still seem to be unable to get them to come in to recognition of that fact. And it's not just Zelensky. And in fact, you may wonder, why does Zelensky have the confidence to so obviously and openly move against what Trump is doing? Because he keeps getting positive signals from Europe. The UK is the biggest pusher of this, right along with France and Germany, and they're still at it. Here is Sir Richard Sharif, a former general in the UK Army, saying this.
This is the moment that Europe should step up and put in place the plans for an integrated air protection zone over central and western Ukraine with Sky Shield. It is entirely possible and with entirely manageable risk for European aircraft to get up in the skies over Ukraine, launched from outside Ukraine, to shoot down drones and other missiles being attacking Ukrainian cities. That would send a really strong message of strength to Russia.
You got to be kidding me. In the now rolling deep into the fourth year of war, now then you want, I mean, this isn't just some talking head. This guy is a knighted General Sir Richard Sharif, who's saying he wants basically air cover for Ukraine. He wants to add a no-fly zone and use Western military power to shoot down Russian drones and missiles in the war zone. And he actually thinks that if the aircraft get up on the NATO side of the line, that Russia's just going to sit there and go, shucks. Well, I guess that now that our aircraft are just going to be less effective in the air and our missiles are going to get shot down at a higher rate. I mean, there's so many problems with this. Let me just look at two. First of all, are you ready to say that we're going to use all the Allied air power indefinitely? Because there is no path whatsoever that could any rational person, to include General Sharif, that this war could come to an end within the foreseeable future. There is no path to that. So you're trying to sign up your side to provide air cover to limit and minimize, not stop, but minimize the Russian air onslaught. So just look at number one, first of all, that say that Russia, for whatever reason, chose not to strike across the border. Let me talk about that separately. You're saying that now that you want this open-ended commitment for Allied air power indefinitely to continue to even further degrade our inventories of air-to-air missiles, anti-missile missiles, and other kinds of ordnance from the air to shoot down. That makes no sense at all. Why would you want to take your own national inventories, which you don't have the industrial capacity to sustain a war of your own, and then commit to this? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, I just am beside myself with the incredible ridiculousness of the suggestion. If anyone listened to that, I mean, you're basically saying take our inventory and wipe it out. Because the industrial capacity, I think, is it would take years already to replace what's lost. It was given to the Ukraine side. Now, if you now add potentially hundreds of missiles, because look, Russia's been firing at the pace of multiple hundreds in some of these salvos by themselves, 2 and 3 times a week sometimes. You'll have to expend that many, and sometimes more. Sometimes you have to spend more anti-aircraft missiles and anti-missile missiles than there are incoming missiles to make sure that you get them all, because it's not 100%. And you want to just start expending by the hundreds our missiles every week? And who's going to sign up for that? How much is that going to cost? What is the objective of that operation? See, those are elementary things, folks. That's something that a second lieutenant who's just come out of officer school should be able to ask. Because we train them to ask that. We train them to think through the first, the second, and third order effects of what you're doing. What is your logistic capability? What is your production capability? What is your sustainment capability? What is the capability on the other side to counter what you're doing there? And what is the objective? That's supposed to be as elementary as it gets. Hell, even privates are supposed to understand there's an objective for something. If you're going to assault a position, if you're going to take a hill, whatever, you've got to know what the objective is before you start off. There's no objective in what he said there other than we can do it. We have aircraft. We have interceptor missiles. We have the technological capacity to do it. And we can shoot down those missiles in there. All true. There's no doubt that we do have that capacity. But then what? And towards what end? He didn't even offer anything in there. And that is really disturbing because that tells me that the elite of the West, even at the highest levels of military and government, aren't thinking in elementary levels. And if that's the guys at the top that are setting your national objectives and coalition objectives in this case, then you've got some bigger problems. That's number one, probably the bigger one. But then the second one is, given everything that Russia has said, do you really want to continue to test them to see if they're going to let you do that with impunity? Because I think that Russia is getting more and more aggravated, and the more that they see them winning on the battlefield, and they do have an objective, they do have an end state in mind, and they do have the industrial and manpower capacity to make it all happen. The Russians are thinking strategically, and the Western side is thinking tactically, and not even all the way through on that. Because I think that the chances are dangerously high that the Russians would say, hey, you start shooting down our stuff, don't think that border is going to protect you because you have now become an active, direct participant in the war, and we will react accordingly. They have said that before. That was on the issue of the long-range weapons. And when previous iterations of people had thought about launching something into the war from the NATO side of the line, they've already said that. So I don't know if this general is saying that because he knows no government's going to actually do it, and so he'll never have to make good on it. He wants to sound tough. I can't say, but I can just tell you that all of this shows that Trump continues to not be able to bring them in line. He continues to not be able to compel even Zelensky himself to come to their side, and he's unwilling to do the walk. The one thing that he can unilaterally do where he doesn't have to worry about bringing anybody along with anything, he's not taking advantage of that. And listen, if you need any more proof in it, just listen to even our own generals. Now, I've talked on here about General Cavoli before. We did a special where we showed General Westmoreland in Vietnam. We showed General Petraeus in the Afghan War and General Cavoli here. And Cavoli here was making all these kind of strange comments about how they could succeed. The Ukraine side is not necessarily going to lose, and the Russians may not win, and all this kind of stuff. But then in his testimony on April 3rd, he admitted this. The Russian defense industrial base is expected to roll out 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 Iskander ballistic and cruise missiles this year. Comparatively, the United States only produces 135 tanks per year and doesn't even produce Bradley fighting vehicles. That's our infantry fighting vehicles, the armored vehicles, the other armored vehicles. Additionally, he said, we anticipate Russia to produce 250,000 artillery shells per month, which puts it on track to build a stockpile 3 times greater than the United States and Europe combined. I mean, gracious folks. Talking about if you can at least add and do math, you can see 1,500 new ones. And by the way, in that same context, he was also saying, but Russia has lost like 3,000 armored vehicles in the previous year, and they continue to get it knocked out. That has to come with a big asterisk because when you knock out a vehicle, Russia has all of the mechanical capabilities to extract that vehicle, pull it back off the line, take it back to a repair facility, get it refurbished, and send it back in. So those are not full losses. But these 1,500 are either brand new or part of the refurbished one. So they keep rotating them in. You know what doesn't have a rotation? The Ukraine side. Their losses are almost all net losses, because they have very limited capacity to repair. And there is nothing else coming in from the West. The United States doesn't send any more Abrams tanks. We haven't sent any more Stryker vehicles, Bradley fighting vehicles. The French have not sent in any more AMX-10s. There's no more German tanks that are coming in, no more Challengers, etc. There's none of those are coming in at all. No reports whatsoever. So even if you want to say, yeah, the Russians lost that many, they've got another 4,500 tanks and armored vehicles that are in the production and can come into the war this year. Even if they maintain this really high level of loss that he claims, you can't match it on the other side. So just sheer math says, okay, there is no point in continuing on with this conversation. We're going to bring it to an end. Meanwhile, on the other side of the line, you have the Russians saying, listen, we're very, very firm here. We have our terms have not changed since last year. Lavrov went to the Brazil for a BRICS meeting earlier this week, and the media reported something that he had said there. Gary, if you can toss that full screen up there. He said Russia, the reporting in the New York Post earlier this week said Russia shamelessly demanded that the U.S. lifted sanctions, that Kiev be demilitarized, and you can add denazified too, because they add that specifically, and recognize that 20% of Ukraine belongs to Vladimir Putin-led nation, as it refused President Trump's push for peace just days after his envoy returned from Moscow. Foreign Minister Lavrov insisted Monday that Russia will accept nothing less than total victory over Ukraine after Witkoff showed up there. So listen, they are unambiguous and clear on their maximalist objectives. They have the military force to do it. We don't, as I just showed you, have the military capacity to resist that. And on top of that, of course, is the manpower issue. So every way you want to look at it, everything you want to count, there is an end to this that will be horrible for the Ukraine side. If Trump has any possibility to try and extricate himself from this politically, he has probably days left before he has to make that call. And because I think that on May the 9th was when Russia has its victory celebration. And believe me, if they're, full of spit and vinegar and fighting force, and from what Lavrov's talking about there, that's nothing compared to what's going to happen after that May 9th celebration. I assure you that's going to really get a lot of people fired up on the Russian side. I mean, they already are. They're looking forward to this like no parade I've ever seen before in the context of this special military operation, as they call it. So if Trump does not do something before that date, and honestly, at this point, it's hard for me to imagine, because if he makes the decision now, when we're literally in the ramp up to the going to the May 9th, of course, it'll just be a feather in Putin's cap, and he'll get the blame for it as well. But listen to me. That's true now, and that's unavoidable because of the failure to act in the first 100+ days. But if you don't, and if you continue to go on there, Trump has a double-edged problem here. He'll be seen as being weak, indecisive, and that his plans don't work for anything, and that unlike what he said on that ABC News clip I showed you a minute ago, Russia can start conquering all of it. Remember, they've been in at least 2 days that I was able to find stats this week, took and seized by force 29 square kilometers in one day, 20 square kilometers in another day. I mean, these are starting to come in bigger chunks, and it's coming all across that line of contact. And if Trump doesn't walk, then he's going to be faced with either having to say, okay, all right, Congress, I need another $100 billion, or I need some huge amount of money here, because it's got to be huge. If it's anything less than $61 billion, which didn't stop the onslaught the last year, then it's going to be seen as literally just throwing money down a hole with a bucket loader, because that's what it would look like. And as I pointed out, it won't matter because there's not the manpower to use it. But if he doesn't do that, then he is seen as even more impotent, because the Russians will continue to go across. The European side altogether can't even come close to matching by a third what the Russians are doing on the key weapon systems. And I didn't even talk about the drones. Ukraine has a pretty potent drone force, but it's exceeded on the Russian side because the technology continues to iterate just like light speed practically. And so that's not even balanced off, but the other things aren't even near balanced. So if Trump doesn't do anything, it's going to get worse and worse and worse for him afterward, because he probably wouldn't be able to get that money passed through Congress. There's many in the Republican side that said, no, just end the war like you said you were going to. Democrats will do whatever they want to go against Trump anyway, so you can just mark that off. That's even though they're the ones that gave all this money in the previous 3 years, now then they'll suddenly find that, it's a bad idea. Whatever. Doesn't matter. Bottom line is Trump is the president. The buck does stop there. And now then we are probably days away from him losing his last chance to even try and pin this on the Biden administration. That's just where we are right now, folks. Before I let you go here, I want to shift gears a little bit to another issue that this ain't the only thing on Trump's plate that he's going to have to worry about, and that's specifically on the possibility of war with Iran. So here in recent days, we've had lots of talk back and forth about whether there's going to be a new maximum pressure campaign on Iran, whether there's going to be bombs. You may recall a month or so ago, Trump said either there's going to be some kind of a negotiated settlement or there will be bombing. And then he seemed to kind of back off of that. And he said, well, but if we can solve this diplomatically, that would be the way to go. So let's just start talking. And then he actually had a couple of rounds of negotiations with Witkoff and some others that are talking with Iran and saying, hey, we can make this stuff happen. We can solve this short of military force. Problem is, you have other constituencies that don't want to go down that path. And again, we're going to see, does President Trump have the leadership necessary to bring his own people in line, the United States side in line, as well as the Israeli side? Because I assure you, there are strong voices that do not want anything short of a military solution for Iran. Now, first of all, we're going to look at something Steve Witkoff was talking, let's see, I think it was about 2 weeks ago on Sean Hannity. Now, as you're watching this clip here, certainly listen to what Witkoff said, but notice the emphasis of Hannity on looking for the military solution.
I'm skeptical, like a lot of other people. How do you have a conversation with people that believe in a caliphate, convert or die, and, the notion that they've got to wipe Israel and the U.S. off the map? I don't know if it's ever going to be possible to get a deal with people that have that ideology and mindset. How'd it go?
Well, Sean, the president's message of peace through strength, it resonates throughout the world. This is not a threat on my part now. It is just a simple fact. The president means what he says, which is they cannot have a bomb. The conversation with the Iranians will be much about two critical points. One, enrichment. As you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%. In other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%. So this is going to be much about verification on the enrichment program and then ultimately verification on weaponization.
So you see, there was some cautious optimism on Witkoff's part there, but you could see Hannity teeing the whole thing up by basically saying, look, I don't see how you even have a negotiated settlement with these guys because they just want destruction and whatever else. It's almost like it doesn't matter what Witkoff is about to say because he's saying it just doesn't matter. We got to go get these guys. I mean, that's the implied statement there. And then Witkoff said, no, but that there's no reason for them to go over 3.67%. Well, that started a firestorm. The next day, Witkoff went, I don't know if it was on Fox, but one of the other networks, and he dropped that whole issue. Well, they don't need to reprocess anything. So obviously, there were some voices that didn't like it, whether that came from President Trump, whether that came from other pressures in the United States or from Israel. We don't know that part. We just know that he did change his stance that day. Well, now then, fast forward to, I think it was a couple of days ago, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor now, who's acting in that capacity, more on that another time, Marco Rubio went also on Hannity, and now he's addressing it. Now you're going to see a much more hawkish view from Rubio now as opposed to Witkoff's optimistic looking towards a negotiated settlement then, but also note how much more and directly hawkish Hannity is.
This is an opportunity for them if they take it. This is the best opportunity they're going to have. President Trump is a president of peace. He doesn't want a war. He doesn't want conflict. None of us do. And there's a path forward here. But what cannot happen is to live in a world where Iran has a nuclear weapon.
The path forward has been given to them, and now it's a matter of whether or not they're going to take it. And the president was very, very clear. He would lead the effort to stop them from ever achieving that nuclear weapon. And that would mean that statement was obvious in terms of that he would use military force to destroy those facilities.
And look, there's a win here for Iran, okay? They can actually have real economic development. have real investment
Yep.
in their country. But they have to walk away from sponsoring terrorists. They have to walk away from helping the Houthis. They have to walk away from building long-range missiles that have no purpose to exist other than having nuclear weapons. And they have to walk away from enrichment.
So all that has to happen, there's a great path forward here for Iran. All they have to do is completely demilitarize themselves, willingly surrender to everything that we say, and make themselves defenseless. I mean, that's a complete non-starter. What country in the world is going to say, yeah, we're going to take, especially in that missile capacity? When he said there's no other purpose for that, well, that's nonsense. Of course there's a purpose for having long-range missiles. It's to be able to defend yourself with conventional warheads, which is all they have right now, to be able to defend themselves. And why what rational person would say, I'm going to put a gun to your head and tell you to give me all your guns, even though you've got one too. And I'm going to say, look, just trust me. It can be good for you. All you got to do is give me all of your guns, all of your weapons, anything that can harm me. Just lay them down and we'll be fine. And then we won't do anything. Trust me. Trust me. If it's irrational just in categorically for any nation to do that, even less for the Iranian side, because they have the experience with this president who already abrogated an agreement in the 2018 with the JCPOA nuclear deal. Just at one time they got out of it and said, in part because it didn't include this new missile situation. But they had worked for like 2 years with the previous administration, Obama administration, on coming up together to have something they could both agree on. And it was quite intrusive on the Iranian side. It was very unpopular among many, but their leaders convinced them that there would be financial benefit for them. Economic activity would improve because sanctions would be released, etc. And so they said, all right, we'll wait and see. So they eventually agreed to it. Obama was good to his word and a lot of that stuff. They did raise some of those sanctions, etc. The Iranian side, for the most part, met most of their requirements. And a lot of the material they had was shipped out of the country. I think a lot of it was delivered off to Russia, which was part of the negotiating teams that did all that stuff. So there were some cheating around the edges, but substantially less capacity, both with centrifuges, with what they could reprocess, how much they could store, etc. Had a 10-year time frame on it. And it didn't include the missile issue because that was a conventional deterrent. They weren't going to agree to that. But then because Trump came in, then didn't like the fact that ballistic missiles were not included. Then he said, okay, the whole thing's over and we're get out of it. So now then the Iranians had trusted the American government, who at that time was led by Obama, and then the new guy comes in and just throws it all in the trash, just unilaterally withdraws from it. Now, why would anyone who had already trusted you once and been badly burned now trust you again? And oh, by the way, all you have to do is completely surrender every national security defense capability that you have and trust me. Obviously, that's not going to work. And so if that's the case, then we have a situation. And then what? You hear me say that all the time. It doesn't seem to resonate inside the White House or any other capitals in the West for that matter. Nobody seems to want to think about what comes next because Hannity's teeing it up pretty clear there. If we don't get these things, and now you see in a very hawkish way, Rubio saying there's a path forward as long as they do these things, and there's very little chance they're going to do them. So now then, Trump is again going to come into a situation to where either you capitulate and you roll over and you don't make good on that, or you're forced into making good on your claim, and then you actually go to war. And let me tell you, if this ain't Syria in the Bashar al-Assad days where you could launch some cruise missiles and blow up some stuff, and then they're just going to cower and go into a shell and lay down. There's very little chance that Iran is going to do that. They have much more capacity than the Syrian government ever had, and they're a huge country. I think it's like 3 times bigger than Iraq. And how did that war go, even with something that was a third the size of Iran, and that they didn't actually have any weapons of mass destruction, and they had almost no conventional capacity, and their ballistic missiles were these old scuds that were not accurate to anything, and they didn't pose any of a threat. We didn't even need to go in there. But when we did, they didn't have the capacity to do anything, and we see how that worked out. Iran also saw how that happened, and they've made sure in the years since that they do have the capacity to reach out and hurt somebody if they get attacked in a similar manner. So if you don't want to take my word for it or just look at the balance of power and the capabilities on each side, here's what the Ayatollah himself said about 2 weeks ago.
با مذاکره با آمریکا هیچ مشکلی حل نمیشه. دلیل تجربه مذاکره کردیم، امتیاز دادیم، کوتاه آمدیم، اما نتیجه‌ای که مقصودمون بود به دست نیاوردیم. همین معاهده را هم با همه این نقص‌هایی که داشت طرف مقابل باز خراب کرد، نقض کرد، پاره کرد. با یه چنین دولتی مذاکره نباید کرد. مذاکره کردن عاقلانه نیست، هوشمندانه نیست، شرافتمندانه نیست. ما اگر تهدیدمون بکنن تهدیدشون میکنیم، اگر این تهدید رو عملی کنن ما هم تهدید رو عملی میکنیم.
I said that was a couple of weeks ago. That was actually a couple of months ago. That was on February 7th. You saw on there. But the only thing that's changed so far is that the Ayatollah has made comments that in recent days that we'll talk to the United States. We'll engage in diplomacy, but we're not going to surrender. We're not going to surrender, but we'll see where things go. And so they've engaged. They've had the direct communications. There's been the 2 rounds of talks at least. I think there maybe have been more since then. And obviously that's a good thing to me. And, like Ian Puttick likes to say when he's on our show, it's talk is a lot better than war, quoting the former prime minister of UK back in World War II. That is certainly where I'm at right now as well. But you see these increasingly strident comments from both, Hannity. Now, you understand, Hannity's not just some TV guy. He's got somebody that has a very close personal relationship with Trump himself. And I promise you, and we saw it all during the first Trump administration, they have a very close relationship, and Hannity's often telling him things. So he's directly in the president's ear. We know there's plenty of people in President Trump's inner circle that are very keen to taking this action. For probably ideological reasons, and certainly many of them are very pro-Israeli government positions and people, and there's lots of very high-level contacts between the governments. We know, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, several times he's been here in the White House not too long ago. Trump, I think it was about 10 days ago, tweeted that I talked again to Benjamin Netanyahu, and we are eye to eye on nearly every topic. They didn't specify what those were, but obviously that the Iranian situation is very clear on that, very top. Trump himself has a couple of times said that if we can't get a deal, we are going to lead out on that. That's what he said. We are going to lead out on solving it the other way if we can't get it the right way. I think I've shown you here. Tom Cotton has been a fierce advocate. Again, somebody who has a relationship with Trump. General Jack Keane maybe doesn't have as much of a personal relationship, but emphatic that that's what we need to do. And you know who else is also emphatic on this? And no surprise, it's on the Israeli side. Now, I'm going to show you here something that Benjamin Netanyahu, sorry, this was Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, who last October, before the election had even been held and we didn't know who was going to be president next, was asked, what is the Israeli situation and what is the Israeli view on solving the Iranian problem?
We've also rendered Iran's ability to defend itself. We've diminished their ability to defend themselves. And now it's time to hit the head of the octopus, the nuclear program and the regime itself.
You actually said that same thing on October 2nd following the ballistic missile attack on Israel. You said Iran had made a terrible mistake and that Israel had its greatest opportunity in 50 years to change the face of the Middle East. That was October 2nd. Have you lost that opportunity?
I don't think so. I think ultimately we should look at this in a whole perspective. And what matters is what we do next. Do we just let go of Iran and let them replenish themselves and fix their air defenses and then beginning rearming the whole octopus in Lebanon and Gaza? Or do we go all in and take out their nuclear program and ultimately help the Iranian people topple this terrible regime that's been ruining their own lives for the past decades.
So you see the Israeli position, they want regime change. They don't just want to be safe. They don't want to even get rid of this alleged nuclear weapons program, which Iran, according to our intelligence, doesn't actually have. They want regime change. And they view this, as he said there, he was referring to something that said about a week before that, quote, that Naftali Bennett views this as a once in a 50-year opportunity to finally go after Iran. That's what they've been looking for. They've been trying to do, and they thought this was their moment. Now, there was a lot of pressure by the Israeli government at the time, and Netanyahu, certainly behind the scenes, was trying to put pressure on Biden to get that done before the election or before he left office. They weren't successful. And of course, now then there has been some advancements and developments. One of the things that Bennett was concerned about there, she said, we don't want to fail to take the advantage now, because that was at the time shortly after Israel had launched a bunch of missiles and taken out some radar sites and some other things near some of these nuclear facilities. He says, we don't want to give them time to rebuild. Well, they have. And of course, because of BRICS and because of Russia's military alliance with Iran, now then, according to many reports anyway, they have S-400 and S-500 air defense systems in some key locations. So it is very unclear whether even American B-2 or the fighters that both the Israeli Air Force and the U.S. Air Force have in the region through some of our air power on our 2 aircraft carrier strike groups, whether they would be able to go in with impunity, as many seem to think even this day. It seems very unlikely. And of course, that's in addition to what I said is the Iranian ability to strike with ballistic missiles all throughout the Middle East, to include against American targets that are very vulnerable to Iranian missiles defense, missile batteries. So the question is going to get down to, what is America's interest here? Is there genuinely an America first foreign policy? Because if there is, then war with Iran isn't even on the table, because Iran does not pose a threat to the United States. If they ever attack us, if they ever choose to go to war with us, we have more than enough combat power that we can just render them completely impotent. And we have a great deal of firepower that we can deploy to the system. But if they don't attack us, there is no reason for us to go after them. As I've said many times, if you don't want them to have a nuclear weapons program, don't give them every reason in the world to make one. And that's unfortunately where we're going. And the idea that Hannity said there, and many others have said too, that the Ayatollahs are this fanatical religious group here that can't be deterred by normal means, like North Korea, like China, like Russia, etc., all the other nuclear weapons states. They say no, even though deterrence has worked since 1945 on every other state that's had them, it won't work here, so we can't risk it, so they say. What those advocates don't tell you, though, is when they say we can't risk that, so we will risk a war, they're oblivious, blind, or stupid, not sure which, but it's one of those three, to the consequences that could come back to us. We could get into another open-ended war. We could find that our ships get hit in the Red Sea against much more capable anti-ship capabilities that Iran has than even the Houthis have. They have smaller numbers. Or our troops in the region can get hit. Or our allies in the region can get hit. Oil facilities can be struck throughout the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz can be mined and just cause incredible chaos from that. And then you still won't have the issue with the nuclear weapon program. Now then, you've virtually certainly pushed them into having a covert nuclear weapons program. And we know that they have a lot of materials that they could reprocess to that high level. And if you go in there and you don't knock everything out, and some of these facilities that they have can continue the reprocessing, now then the next thing you have is a nuclear test, and all of a sudden the Rubicon has been crossed. And in the process of trying, you may lose B-1 bombers, you may lose F-18s, you may lose some of our ships. No one wants to talk about the consequence of that. And then just almost certainly this allure that you can bomb your way into a regime change is so alluring, and it's almost always a failure. And even in the few times it succeeds, you have complete chaos and disaster afterwards. What rational person can think that by taking out the Ayatollah, the Ayatollah regime, that you're going to get some pro-American something in its place? You have no idea what would come in its place. There would be complete chaos inside the country, and almost certainly devolve into a civil war like what we saw in Syria. Because even if you take out some of the senior leaders, I mean, there are a whole range of people inside the power ministries in that country. You can't kill everybody with bombs. And so they're still going to be in power. And if you have people try to rise up to take advantage of it, now that you've got a civil war, and you don't know how the civil war would turn out. All we know is that lots of people would be killed, that our interests would be harmed, and that the threat of terrorism would expand incredibly in the Middle East, and the violence would go up. Nobody wants to talk about that on these people who say we can't risk this. What the prudent and wise thing to do is to get this deal off the table, get this threat of war off the table, come to whatever accommodation we can have with Iran, and keep our deterrent very strong so that if they ever act on anything, if they do anything, which they have shown since their inception in 1979, that they recognize the balance of power and that they are deterred from attacking us. And there is no reason whatsoever to think that that won't project another 50, 60 years into the future. There's no reason, because the dynamics that existed since 1979 will continue to exist into perpetuity as long as we don't cross a Rubicon and actually take the war to them directly and then see what they're going to do afterward, and then just have this blind, absurd hope that somehow things would work out better for us. That is just almost certainly not going to happen, and we don't need to find out. So if President Trump is truly an America First president, if he genuinely puts the interests of our country above any other country, even a close ally, then he needs to make sure we don't go to war here, period, unless we're attacked. I'll just categorically say it. Then every calculation is changed at that point. But if we're not directly attacked, there is no rational, no legal, no moral reason why we should go to war with Iran. That's the truth of it, and now you know too. Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you guys always on a Saturday sticking with us here. We always do value your input. We value some of the comments that you make here. Gary's thrown a few of those up there, and we welcome you to continue to do that, even if you don't agree. And I know some of you don't, and I value that too. That's why we like this platform, because you get to actually interact with us. This is not just like watching some TV show. You actually get to engage with each other and sometimes with us too. Love that about this channel, because we don't have an echo chamber here. We had a guest on yesterday that a lot of people didn't like in some of the things, but listen, as I said on the very first show we published, we're not an echo chamber, and we're going to bring people on that you dislike. And if you want to complain about them, you're free to do that. We give you the space for it. So we do value you guys, and we are going to continue to be unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, because you deserve it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.